What the city is talking about. This is Montreal Now on News Talk Radio, CJAD 800.
That is James MENNIE over at the Montreal Gazette. So, Jim, I guess we'll start with PSPP, getting everybody worked up at the big PQ confab a couple of days ago. I want to play a tiny little clip of what he had to say, and we'll go from there. Brian?
Nous vivrons bel et bien un troisième référendum sur l'indépendance du Québec. C'est désormais une certitude.
Yeah, it's a certitude, Jim. A certitude. That's going to happen. So tell me what you think.
Well, you know, the biggest question I've always said in any news story, whether it's political or otherwise, is why. And I'm still scratching my head over why, 2 years away from anything resembling a test of the PQ's popularity, of its credibility, that Monsieur Saint-Pierre Plamondon has decided to throw down so hard and so clearly, grabbing the text of his speech, of his address to his audience from the homework scribbler of Francois Legault. Here, it's not just Legault anymore who's saying that, you know, Quebec is under siege, is under threat. The federal government, this federal regime will erase us. It is going to, you know, eliminate Quebec. We are done for if we stay with this federal regime. Our population is dwindling. We have no choice but to separate. It's never made clear, by the way, how separation is going to address what is the fundamental issue for Quebec's future, which is its dwindling so-called, you know, quote-unquote native population. But all that said, why would someone who thus far has played his cards so well commit what, as far as I'm concerned, is a major gaffe? Remember, Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon does have a sense of drama, but he also knows how to troll just a little bit. You remember the Big Dog and Pony show over the loyalty oath to the Queen or the King, and he kept on saying, "I am not going to swear any oath of allegiance to the King of England," blah, 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 blah. And he kept repeating the King en français, le roi d'Angleterre. And he knew that is going to resonate in the regions, in Catalan, because there, the idea of United Kingdom is c'est le roi d'Angleterre, even though the Oxford-educated Saint-Pierre Plamondon knows perfectly well the reason that politicians in this country swear an oath to the monarch is because, not because Charles is the King of England, it's because, whether you like it or not, he is the King of Canada and the head of state, and that's why politicians are obliged to swear that oath in most cases. Now, for him to turn around this weekend and use this kind of language, you suggest there's a plan. But you know what, Aaron? I'm getting a little scared that maybe there isn't. I'm getting a little scared that, you know, when your caucus meetings can also double as a bridge game, I think there's not a lot of fresh data being processed by the party. I don't think there's a lot of new perspectives being brought to the game. And this idea of turning around, like maybe he says, listen, I'm going to rip the Band-Aid off. People say they like my honesty. I'm going to be perfectly honest. But, man, I find it very difficult to believe, A, that Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon can sustain this level of hysteria for the next 2 years, and B, that anybody by the end of those 2 years will still be interested in anything he has to say.
Well, here's the thing, right? So you come out and you act this way, which is very different. I just mentioned this earlier on about having talked, I think it was to Jean-François Lisée about a week or so ago about this. The idea that up until now, you know, whoever that was heading the PQ would kind of leave this whole referendum story right till the very end. You didn't want to have to talk this up because you knew it was going to work against you. He's rewriting this playbook, Jim, and I wonder if at some point when we start to see polling on this, right, people hearing him speaking this way who suddenly will simply say, oh, wait a sec, no, that's not what I want, if he starts to see his numbers fall off.
Oh, I think that's entirely possible. In fact, I think it's quite likely. I'm not sure if it's going to happen in time for the next survey, which I'm guessing is going to drop maybe this week or next. But certainly, he did himself some damage. This is exactly the kind of thing that pushed people away from the CAQ. They didn't go to the PQ because they want to have a separate Quebec, or because they want to realize the dream of sovereignty. They went to the PQ because the leader of that party was not talking like some flaming, village curé who saw, enemies under every rock, excuse me, and saw adversaries and threats everywhere. They want someone who's kind of normal. And I hate to say it this way, Aaron. There's people out there, and maybe some of our listeners as well. There's Anglos out there who think that, no matter what they say or do, those Frenchmen in Quebec, they're all separatists, okay? And they're just waiting for the blue flare. And then, they get the signal and they're all going to reach under their chins. They're going to pull off their masks and they'll have a big fleur-de-lis on their forehead. They're all going to vote in the next referendum. They're going to separate. I think Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon has bought into this nonsense, that this idea that deep inside every Quebec Francophone de souche is a separatist, is going to vote in favor of sovereignty, and that's it. And the fact of the matter is, and maybe that's something even a man of his generation has difficulty in accepting, it's over. Quebecers are not the same people who swayed back and forth at the Paul Sylvie Arena back in the 80s. They're not the same people, who were cheering Jacques Parizeau in '95. Okay, those days are gone. People in Quebec want to move forward, and what we saw this past weekend from Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon was basically him quite deliberately hitting the clutch, throwing the party into reverse, and hoping he doesn't drive over his own foot.
By the way, this is the same, Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, who's very much aware, Jim, that, support for sovereignty, and we've said this a million times, still roughly 33, 35%. Yeah. What would lead you, knowing that's the case, to go ahead and do something like this?
As I say, I'm still scratching my head over it. Okay. Maybe he knows something that I don't, but quite frankly, every indicator, and this has transcended whatever transformations we've gone through in terms of the political landscape, whether it's PACIS versus Liberal, or the CAQ versus everybody, or PQ resurgence simply because the CAQ is so bloody awful. It is not an issue, and I hate to say it this way, but that 30 to 35% is going to dwindle, because that 30 to 35%, let's face it, that's boomer town. And the boomers are getting older, and how can I put it? That demographic tends to be, attriting its way out of existence. Young people have no taste for sovereignty. If you don't believe me, ask Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois and the moribund Quebec Solidaire movement, which, quite frankly, I think some people in Quebec Solidaire have even figured out that if they drop the sovereignty issue tomorrow, they might be better in the polls. But this is it. To a certain extent, yes. The leader of the PQ is handcuffed to the party's raison d'etre. But as you quite rightly mentioned, Aaron, in the past, leaders, and we're talking about, my God, decades, leaders of the PQ have managed to finesse their way around that, actually provide good government, and avoid the whole issue of sovereignty, just sort of like saying the usual catchphrases, paying the lip service to the cause, even though they know that it would not, that it wouldn't fly. And I got to tell you, Eric James was, of course, asked for his opinion on this today, and he raised a very interesting point, that why is Monsieur Saint-Pierre Plamondon touting the idea of a third referendum when the previous two referendums were held and lost? Support for sovereignty was much higher then than it is now.
Yeah, that's a good point. I will ask why, just to point out, someone just sent a text in, Jim, this is interesting, saying maybe this was his, for Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, his PKP moment, that fist pump in Joliette.
But you know what? I just thought, up until now, I mean, the PKP thing was PKP. That was just a guy who just, he lives in real time. But I always had the impression that Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon perhaps devoted some thought to before he says anything. And I like to think that's what he did this weekend. And that's why I'm still scratching my head over this. I don't see the plus side for this for him. And I guess we'll see in the next press conferences if he calls a press conference to discuss item A or topic A, and everyone's still asking about,
exactly.
Really, this referendum. Yeah. What were you thinking? That'll be an indication as well. But was it a lapsus? I don't think so. I think it wasn't. If it was a slip of the tongue, Aaron, it lasted for about 25 minutes. So I think there may be more to it than that.
All right, let me move on to this other story. Just when the government might have thought they had all their deals settled, turns out the FIC, the nurses union, have said not so fast, not happening.
Well, this is what gets me, because we're looking at the FIC, which is the largest nursing union, in Quebec. But the fact of the matter is, their bargaining committee had said, listen, this is the best that we can get. We recommend that you accept it. The rank and file rejected it by 61%, by a margin of 73 in the regions, because the idea of mobility, the idea of managers being able to reassign nurses from one hospital to the other in some regions, that's a big piece of geography to cover. That wasn't really settled. But there's also the thing we have to remember, that even when we had the teachers' strike and the teachers' union settlement, it was by the skin of their teeth. 4 of the 9 affiliated unions rejected it. And the ones that did accept it did so by very narrow margins. And what concerns me as a citizen, as a taxpayer, as a consumer of Quebec healthcare, and as someone who does have a stake in the Quebec education system, I'm getting the impression that, yeah, we have a deal, but we have a lot of unhappy nurses and teachers in a jurisdiction that claims to be, overseen by a government that, our priorities are health and education. And I get the impression that people who are responsible for the day-to-day operations of those systems are not happy at all.
I wonder, Jim, that word flexibility came up again, right? Because the minister response was, oh, no, yeah, we're going to look at this, but we still want flexibility. This is becoming the CAC's austerity word, flexibility, which is costing them all this reaction from unions. And I wonder if, this is the thing that, well, I'm not going to bring them down, but you know what I'm saying. They don't seem to want to get off that horse, and unions are simply not taking it.
Listen, they signed the deal for, 3 years? Okay, the next election's in 2 years. But guess what? Public servants vote. And maybe, I'm not saying that they en bloc, they voted for the CAC the last time. Will it eat into the CAC's already dwindling popularity? I absolutely believe so. And I think that the question now, and here we are, I'm doing what we're supposed to do, Aaron. We're talking about the PQ. We're talking about the CAC. My God. And I'm not the first person to have asked this question. I won't be the last. What exactly, right now, are the Quebec Liberals doing? Are they still twiddling their thumbs, waiting for their leadership selection process to begin? Because right now, this situation is in such an incredible state of flux that if you came down like an act of God with some kind of policy, with some kind of statement that will put you back on the map, this is the time to do it. And something tells me that's simply not going to happen.
Wait and see. Jim, thank you. Appreciate it.
That amount.